Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring isolation. The Recluse by McKimmey. Mr. Loneliness by Henry Slesar. The Nothing Equation by Tom Godwin. The Long Question by David Mason. Mid Pleasures and Palaces by James McKimmey, Jr.
The Recluse by McKimmey, originally published in Planet Stories, Winter 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The human voice, had there ever been so sweet a sound? Arak Miller ached for it, too eagerly, too swiftly. 25 years later, a ship appeared on an afternoon in the planet Summer. Arak Miller watched it from the mesa. From Earth, he thought, from Earth! But Arak Miller was an ordered man. Even now, in the face of resurging visions of his wife and his sons and his work and the mighty civilization from which he had been cut adrift, his thoughts were ordered. Probably the ship had arrived from Earth to resurvey one of the Class II uninhabitable planets of the Alpha Centaurus system. Tomorrow its scout ships would whip along the daysides at 5,000 feet. Tomorrow atop the mesa he must light his pyres, some 100-odd gigantic piles of pine trees and brush that would burn with billowing smoke. He must signal the presence of a lone Earthman. With a hypnotic intensity he stood watching the ship until, toward evening, it merged into the grey sky over the horizon. Then he ran across the clearing and down to his house by the river that wound through the valley 1,000 feet below. "Come on, you fool!" he shouted to Marbach, sitting beneath a tree. Arak Miller threw the figure over his shoulder and carried him to the house. He sat Marbach on a chair and went into the kitchen to eat. Arak Miller had been nomadic the first few years after he crashed and had been abandoned for dead, until he found in the planet's narrow temperate zone one of the few arable regions capable of sustaining him. There was sufficient small game, the river was cool, and because the rain fell mainly in the valley, his pyres were safe. In recent years he was always building. He had added a front porch to the cabin he had started with, then more rooms which he had never used, then an attic into which he never went. Now it was a house. It had chairs and tables, a bed, a rug of vines, a garden for vegetables and tobacco, and a garden for flowers. He ate a leisurely meal of potatoes and corn and meat of the rabbit-like creatures which he trapped. Miss Gormley was sitting on the porch as he went out. "A ship's come," he shouted. "I may be saved, do you understand?" He recalled he had intended to do something about Miss Gormley's nostril. With one of his knives he scraped a little against the wall of her left nostril. Then he stood back, satisfied. "Now you look better," he said. With a wry grin he added, "You can smell better too." For a long time he could not sleep, remembering that he had been cut off in the prime of his life. He had been the senior astrophysicist in the Systems War Office on Earth, working on the second Einstein modifications that promised travel to the more distant galactic systems. He had completed 6 months of comparison spectrography in the barren Centaurus system and had been about to take the year's return journey to Earth, looking forward to a vacation trip with his family to Venus City. He had been in the forefront of the free world's pushing back of the last frontiers of man. He twisted on his bed in a wild agony of hope and yearning. "Some day soon," he shouted to the walls, "I'll ride the monorail across the western plains." He had discovered that it helped to talk aloud, though none of his devices would make him forget he was a prisoner. To feel the Centaurus skies closing down on him and the alien mountains crushing him, so far from his work and those he loved, was to feel a terrible suffocation from which there was no release. But then he would go doggedly to work, or else carve the life-size figures to keep him silent company and try to forget. He talked on, and finally he could talk no more. He slept. He was awakened by a pattering on the roof. "Rain!" he shouted. He jumped up and ran to the window socket. The rain clouds were high and heavy with storm. It struck him like a blow. They hung above the Mesa, above his pyres. In a panic he clambered up to the Mesa, forgetting his breakfast, forgetting his outer clothing, his mind in disorder. The shock wave pounded his eardrums. He was too startled to make words. With unbelieving eyes he saw, about 5 miles away where the river emptied into the sea, the black cloud of an atomic explosion rise into the sky to spread out under the rain. Then suddenly he was running blindly through the rain. The scout must have come down. There must be testing. The area was ideal for testing atomic weapons. I must reach them before they leave. Through heavy undergrowth he pushed his way down the slope to the valley. His foot slipped on an exposed root. With a sharp crack of bone he fell. "My ankle!" he screamed, with terror smashing at his mind. He managed to find 2 thick lengths of branch that would serve as crutches. Then he started hobbling awkwardly toward the river. For an hour he forced himself on urgently along the river bank, now feeling lifelike pain slicing up through his body. The effort of moving was beginning to exhaust him. He fell down and rested a moment. He heard a tree crash in the forest ahead. He heard someone shout. A human voice! He began to sob, softly at first, then uncontrollably. A human voice! It had never been so sweet a sound. He climbed painfully to his feet, crashed on through the undergrowth. The density of trees ended abruptly, and he stopped. Around the scout ship in the clearing beyond, robot dredgers were digging the foundations for buildings. Grey uniformed men were setting up a new type atomic artillery at the perimeters. Arak Miller drew a deep breath. "I'm saved," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm going to be a free man." He tottered on the edge of hysteria, but controlled himself with a mighty effort of will. He took a step forward to reach the clearing. Then he stopped. Something was wrong. He tried to put together the pieces of his mind. Everything looked normal. Construction going on, stores being transferred to temporary warehouses. All the usual activities of a scout party on an atomic testing mission. The artillery was pointing. That was the flaw. The artillery faced inward. He looked back at the construction work. Not foundations for buildings, he said dully. Ditches. As he watched, a flag was run up on a pole. The dreams of Arak Miller crashed in his mind. It was the flag of the slave world, superimposed upon the symbol of the systems. The world controlled by the dictators, which for centuries had existed alongside the free world in a perpetual Cold War. During some stage of Arak Miller's long imprisonment from Venus to Centaurus, the dictators had taken over. Hidden from guards, he lay on the ground and watched for a long time. Only when the next batch of captives was taken out of the scout ship and lined up in front of the ditch did he turn his gaze away. He waited till the next shock wave had passed, then with tears streaming down his face, hobbled back in the rain toward the river. He crawled the last 2 miles to his house. Miss Gormley was sitting where he had left her. "I am sorry," he said painfully. "I will have to destroy you, and Marbach, and our house, and the pyres, and when all that is done, I will have to leave this area. Otherwise they might find me." Miss Gormley stared blindly out at the river. He lay still on the floor, gasping for breath. "You see," he explained, "I am not a prisoner. They are the prisoners. All of them. All the world. But me." His eyes closed in exhaustion. "I like it here now," he said, almost in a whisper. "I intend to stay. There must be some place here where they can never find me, you understand?"
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. Mr. Loneliness by Henry Slesar. Originally published by Super Science Fiction, February 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. There were winds on the asteroid, and they blew in threads of heat and cold, chilling your feet and dampening your brow with sweat. The man shivered and cursed when the winds blew, condemning the freak currents of space, damning the authority which had anchored him to this lonely outpost. "If you could only feel them," he said intensely to the three men at the other side of the room. "No thanks," said Briggs. He laughed, and the sound was like brass. "I feel it in my sleep sometimes," the man said moodily, staring at the floor. "It does something to your dreams. I have the strangest nightmares." "Maybe it's the rations," Town suggested, with a hint of a twinkle. Town was a great kidder. "Trouble with you, Pace," said Briggs. "You think too much. Too many gadgets out here to do your work for you. The authority ought to scrap some of these robot controls and get you to use your hands. It's a great cure for the doldrums, you know." Murchison, the third man, looked grave. "In my opinion," he said judiciously, "we need a better rotation system out here. How long have you been observing on GT8? 1 year, 5 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. Pace looked at nothing. 2 hours, 40 minutes, and 7 seconds, eh? Town chuckled. You outposters are all alike. Living clocks, every one of you. He nudged Murchison's side. Watch this, Dino. What time is it now, Pace? No fair looking. 1600 plus 20, the man answered dully. Town checked his wrist. On the button, he said gleefully. You really get a talent for it on this job. Use your hands, Briggs insisted. Get out and dig. Plant something. Build something. Make yourself some furniture. Murchison frowned. Not so fast, Freddy. He took a folded paper from his hip pocket and whispered something to the man by his side. Spec sheet, GT8. Never mind, said Pace. I don't expect you to know the specs on every outpost on the belt. Briggs looked embarrassed. Oh, well, okay. So you can't do planting there. But you could find something to do. You know this fellow Morgan on TW1? He's got quite a project underway. He's building a miniature Earth. Town giggled. Ambitious fellow. No, really, Briggs said earnestly. Got himself a plastics shop, and is making models of every city on Earth. Fabulous thing. Take a lesson, Pace. The man stood up and went to the viewport of the cabin. I'm not a child, Briggs. That's a lousy attitude, Town said cheerfully. Perhaps, Murchison said solemnly. You've lost sight of your purpose out here. Nuts, said Pace inaudibly. We've got reason to be mighty proud of you fellows, you know. You're the real backbone of the space fleet. You're the men who keep the space lanes safe. You're only happy when you're griping, Town said good-naturedly. That's okay with me, pal. That's the American way, isn't it? He grinned at the other two. Just like the army. Gripe, gripe, gripe. He rubbed the flesh around his middle and yawned sleepily. Then there's the radio, of course, Briggs said. You can always hear a friendly voice. Friendly? Pace smiled grimly. Have you listened in on your control stations lately? Those boys are all business. Well, they're pretty busy, Pace. You have to remember that. Murchison folded his hands into his lap. Busy, said Pace enviously. I know what's eating him, Town said wisely. It's the girl. Pace looked away. Laura was very sorry about not showing up, Pace, Murchison said. It's this rotten virus stuff that's going around. You know how she looks forward to these visits. You bet, Town agreed. There's an outposter on G70 who'll really cry in his beer when we show up without her. The sweetheart of space, the man said sardonically. Oh, come on, Briggs said. You like to see her as much as anybody else, Pace. She's a good kid. All right, Pace said. Everybody likes to look at a pretty girl, Town said archly. Can't blame you for not being happy with only our mugs to look at. That's really the trouble, isn't it? No, Pace answered. Don't kid me, Town said. Don't forget, I'm the personal affairs officer. I know what you guys are interested in. That's the big beef on the belt, dames. It's not just that, Pace said painfully. Sure, it's not. It's... Pace looked disgusted. He picked up an object from the table and turned it in his hand. What's that, Pace? The man jiggled it in his palm. A carving. I've been doing some carving. Only this coal-type mineral. Let's see it. Pace concealed it. It's nothing, he said. That's the stuff, Pace. Briggs looked pleased. Keep those hands busy. Keep your mind off space. And Laura, Town said. Murchison stood up. Well? Well, what? Pace glanced up anxiously. Time to focus out, Murchison said. Got a lot of space to cover. But it's only 1600 plus 30. See what I mean? Said Town, checking his watch. It's a sort of genius. We'll be back in a couple of months, Murchison said, gesturing towards the others. We'll have a real long chat then. And we'll bring Laura with us, Town said significantly. Don't go yet, Pace pleaded. Really, Pace. Tell me about things back home. You get the newscasts, Briggs said. What more can we tell you? So long, fella. Town stood up. It's early, I tell you. Pace dropped the object in his hand. The light glittered on the smooth, plain surfaces as it fell. It was the bust of a woman, with long flowing hair, her chin tilted defiantly, her blank eyes somehow vital and seeing. When it hit the ground, it shattered into white powder, and the wind leaped upon the fragments like a hungry animal. You're lucky we stayed this long, Town said, speaking now without a smile. You're no fun to pay a call on, Buster, let me tell you. Cut it out, Town. Murchison's tone was sharp. There are 50 guys on our itinerary, Town said. They all have the same problem, but you're the bleedingest heart of them all, Pace. The man glowered. He got to his feet. Maybe I'll get lucky in 2 months, Town said. Maybe I'll get a nice convenient virus too. Town. Briggs touched him on the elbow, and Town shook off his fingers angrily. I'm sick of this guy, he said bitterly. Sick of all his stupid complaints, Mr. Loneliness. You dirty groundworm! Pace's voice shook. You rotten! His hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. You watch your step, buddy. Cut it out, you guys. I'll kill you! Pace put a stumbling foot forward. I'll kill you, Town! Town stared at the man, and then he laughed. Go ahead, he said. Try. Pace made an ugly noise. His body crouched, and then he sprung at the laughing figure of this visitor. Instinctively, Town threw up his arms in defence. Pace! Don't be an idiot! The man's arms thrust forward like driving pistons, fingers clutching toward the throat of Town. His face twisted into a parody of rage. His motion propelled him half a foot off the ground. He realized his mistake too late. His hands went through and beyond Town's throat, his arms slipping through Town's chest. He fell heavily through the man's body and hit the ground with sickening abruptness. He lay there, still conscious. He began to cry, and the sound brought a look of disgust to the face of the shadow he had attacked. "What a baby!" Towns said. Briggs looked uncomfortable. "Let's focus out," he said. "Right," said Town. In a room back on Earth, a dial was spun and a connection severed. In a room on a lonely asteroid, 3 spectral images, electronic ghosts on a mission of mercy, faded and vanished. The man pulled himself to his feet and looked around him. All was silence. The winds blew.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. The Nothing Equation by Tom Godwin. Originally published in Amazing Stories, December 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The cruiser vanished back into hyperspace, and he was alone in the observation bubble, 10,000 light-years beyond the galaxy's outermost sun. He looked out the windows at the gigantic sea of emptiness around him, and wondered again what the danger had been that had so terrified the men before him. Of one thing he was already certain: he would find that nothing was waiting outside the bubble to kill him. The first bubble attendant had committed suicide, and the second was a mindless maniac on the earthbound cruiser, but it must have been something inside the bubble that had caused it, or else they had imagined it all. He went across the small room, his magnetized soles loud on the thin metal floor in the bubble's silence. He sat down in the single chair, his weight very slight in the feeble artificial gravity, and reviewed the known facts. The bubble was a project of Earth's Galactic Observation Bureau, positioned there to gather data from observations that could not be made from within the galaxy. Since metallic mass affected the hypersensitive instruments, the bubble had been made as small and as light as possible. It was for that reason that it could accommodate only one attendant. The Bureau had selected Horn as the bubble's first attendant, and the cruiser left him there for his 6 months' period of duty. When it made its scheduled return with his replacement, he was found dead from a tremendous overdose of sleeping pills. On the table was his daily report log and his last entry made 3 months before. "I haven't attended to the instruments for a long time because it hates us and doesn't want us here. It hates me the most of all and keeps trying to get into the bubble to kill me. I can hear it whenever I stop and listen, and I know it won't be long. I'm afraid of it, and I want to be asleep when it comes. But I'll have to make it soon because I've only 20 sleeping pills left, and if—" The sentence was never finished. According to the temperature recording instruments in the bubble, his body ceased radiating heat that same night. The bubble was cleaned, fumigated, and inspected inside and out. No sign of any inimical entity or force could be found. Silverman was Horn's replacement. When the cruiser returned 6 months later, bringing him, Green, to be Silverman's replacement, Silverman was completely insane. He babbled about something that had been waiting outside the bubble to kill him, but his nearest to a rational statement was to say once, when asked for the 100th time what he had seen, "Nothing. You can't really see it, but you feel it watching you, and you hear it trying to get in to kill you. One time I bumped the wall, and, for God's sake, take me away from it. Take me back to Earth." Then he had tried to hide under the captain's desk, and the ship's doctor had led him away. The bubble was minutely examined again, and the cruiser employed every detector device it possessed to search surrounding space for light years in all directions. Nothing was found. When it was time for the new replacement to be transferred to the bubble, he reported to Captain McDowell. "Everything is ready, Green," McDowell said. "You are the next one." His shaggy grey eyebrows met in a scowl. "It would be better if they would let me select the replacement instead of them." He flushed with a touch of resentment and said, "The Bureau found my intelligence and initiative of thought satisfactory." "I know. The characteristics you don't need. What they ought to have is somebody like one of my engine room roustabouts, too ignorant to get scared and too dumb to go nuts. Then we could get a sane report 6 months from now instead of the ravings of a maniac." "I suggest," he said stiffly, "that you reserve judgment until that time comes, sir." And that was all he knew about the danger, real or imaginary, that had driven 2 men into insanity. He would have 6 months in which to find the answer. 6 months minus... He looked at the chronometer and saw that 20 minutes had passed since he left the cruiser. Somehow it seemed much longer. He moved to light a cigarette, and his metal soles scraped the floor with the same startling loudness he had noticed before. The bubble was silent as a tomb. It was not much larger than a tomb, a sphere 18 feet in diameter, made of thin sheet steel and criss-crossed outside with narrow reinforcing girders to keep the internal air pressure from rupturing it. The floor under him was 6 feet up from the sphere's bottom, and the space beneath held the air regenerator and waste converter units, the storage batteries, and the food cabinet. The compartment in which he sat contained chair, table, a narrow cot, banks of dials, a remote control panel for operating the instruments mounted outside the hull, a microfilm projector, and a pair of exerciser springs attached to one wall. That was all. There was no means of communication, since a hyperspace communicator would have affected the delicate instruments with its radiations, but there was a small microfilm library to go with a projector, so that he should be able to pass away the time pleasantly enough. But it was not the fear of boredom that was behind the apprehension he could already feel touching at his mind. It had not been boredom that had turned Horn into a suicide and Silverman into... Something cracked sharply behind him, like a gunshot in the stillness, and he leaped to his feet, whirling to face it. It was only a metal reel of data tape that had dropped out of the spectrum analyzer into the storage tray. His heart was thumping fast, and his attempt to laugh at his nervousness sounded hollow and mirthless. Something, inside or outside the bubble, had driven 2 men insane with its threat, and now that he was irrevocably exiled in the bubble himself, he could no longer dismiss their fear as products of their imagination. Both of them had been rational, intelligent men, as carefully selected by the Observation Bureau as he had been. He set in to search the bubble, overlooking nothing. When he crawled down into the lower compartment, he hesitated, then opened the longest blade of his knife before searching among the dark recesses down there. He found nothing, not even a speck of dust. Back in his chair again, he began to doubt his first conviction. Perhaps there really had been some kind of an invisible force or entity outside the bubble. Both Horn and Silverman had said that it had tried to get in to kill them. They had been very definite about that part. There were 6 windows around the bubble's walls, set there to enable the attendant to see all the outside-mounted instruments and dials. He went to them to look out, one by one, and from all of them he saw the same vast emptiness that surrounded him. The galaxy, his galaxy, was so far away that its stars were like dust. In the other directions, the empty gulf was so wide that galaxies and clusters of galaxies were tiny, feeble specks of lights shining across it. All around him was a void so huge that galaxies were only specks in it. Who could know what forces or dangers might be waiting out there? A light blinked, reminding him it was time to attend to his duties. The job required an hour, and he was nervous and not yet hungry when he had finished. He went to the exerciser springs on the wall and performed a workout that left him tired and sweating, but which at least gave him a small appetite. The day passed, and the next. He made another search of the bubble's interior with the same results as before. He felt almost sure then that there was nothing in the bubble with him. He established a routine of work, pastime, and sleep that made the first week pass fairly comfortably, but for the gnawing worry in his mind that something invisible was lurking just outside the windows. Then one day he accidentally kicked the wall with his metal shoe tip. It made a sound like that from kicking a tight-stretched section of tin, and it seemed to him it gave a little from the impact, as tin would do. He realized for the first time how thin it was, how deadly, dangerously thin. According to the specifications he had read, it was only 1/16 of an inch thick. It was as thin as cardboard. He sat down with pencil and paper and began calculating. The bubble had a surface area of 146,500 square inches, and the internal air pressure was 14 pounds to the square inch, which meant that the thin metal skin contained a total pressure of 2,051,000 pounds. 2 million pounds. The bubble in which he sat was a bomb, waiting to explode the instant any section of the thin metal weakened. It was supposed to be an alloy so extremely strong that it had a high safety factor, but he could not believe that any metal so thin could be so strong. It was all right for engineers sitting safely on Earth to speak of high safety factors, but his life depended upon the fragile wall not cracking. It made a lot of difference. The next day he thought he felt the hook to which the exerciser spring was attached crack loose from where it was welded to the wall. He inspected the base of the hook closely, and there seemed to be a fine hairline fracture appearing around it. He held his ear to it, listening for any sound of a leak. It was not leaking yet, but it could commence doing so at any time. He looked out the windows at the illimitable void that was waiting to absorb his pitiful little supply of air, and he thought of the days he had hauled and jerked at the strings with all his strength, not realizing the damage he was doing. There was a sick feeling in his stomach for the rest of the day, and returned again and again to examine the hairline around the hook. The next day he discovered an even more serious threat. The thin skin of the bubble had been spot welded to the outside reinforcing girders. Such welding often created hard, brittle spots that would soon crystallize from continued movement, and there was a slight temperature difference in the bubble between its working and sleeping hours that would daily produce a contraction and expansion of the skin, especially when he used the little cooking burner. He quit using the burner for any purpose, and began a daily inspection of every square inch of the bubble's walls, marking with white chalk all the welding spots that appeared to be definitely weakened. Each day he found more to mark, and soon the little white circles were scattered across the walls wherever he looked. When he was not working at examining the walls, he could feel the windows watching him like staring eyes. Out of self-defense he would have to go to them and stare back at the emptiness. Space was alien, coldly, deadly alien. He was a tiny spark of life in a hostile sea of nothing, and there was no one to help him. The nothing outside was waiting day and night for the most infinitesimal leak or crack in the walls. the nothing that had been waiting out there since time without beginning and would wait for time without end. Sometimes he would touch his finger to the wall and think, death is out there, only 1/16th of an inch away. His first fears became a black and terrible conviction. The bubble could not continue to resist the attack for long. It had already lasted longer than it should have. 2 million pounds of pressure wanted out, and all the sucking nothing of intergalactic space wanted in. And only a thin skin of metal, rotten with brittle welding spots, stood between them. It wanted in. The nothing wanted in. He knew then that Horn and Silverman had not been insane. It wanted in, and some day it would get in. When it did, it would explode him and jerk out his guts and lungs. Not until that happened, not until the nothing filled the bubble and enclosed his hideous, turned inside-out body, would it ever be content. He had long since quit wearing the magnetized shoes, afraid the vibration of them would weaken the bubble still more. And he began noticing sections where the bubble did not seem to be perfectly concave, as though the rolling mill had pressed the metal too thin in places, and it was swelling out like an overinflated balloon. He could not remember when he had last attended to the instruments. Nothing was important but the danger that surrounded him. He knew the danger was rapidly increasing, because whenever he pressed his ear to the wall, he could hear the almost inaudible tickings and vibrations as the bubble's skin contracted or expanded, and the nothing tapped and searched with its empty fingers for a flaw or crack that it could tear into a leak. But the windows were far the worst, with the nothing staring in at him day and night. There was no escape from it. He could feel it watching him, malignant and gloating, even when he hid his eyes in his hands. The time came when he could stand it no longer. The cot had a blanket, and he used that together with all his spare clothes to make a tent stretching from the table to the first instrument panel. When he crawled under it, he found that the lower half of one window could still see him. He used the clothes he was wearing to finish the job, and it was much better then, hiding there in the concealing darkness where the nothing could not see him. He did not mind going naked. The temperature regulators in the bubble never let it get too cold. He had no conception of time from then on. He emerged only when necessary to bring more food into his tent. He could still hear the nothing tapping and sucking in its ceaseless search for a flaw, and he made such emergencies as brief as possible, wishing that he did not have to come out at all. Maybe if he could hide in his tent for a long time and never make a sound, it would get tired and go away. Sometimes he thought of the cruiser and wished they would come for him, but most of the time he thought of the thing that was outside, trying to get in to kill him. When the strain became too great, he would draw himself up in the position he had once occupied in his mother's womb, and pretend he had never left Earth. It was easier there. But always, before very long, the bubble would tick or whisper, and he would freeze in terror, thinking, "This time it's coming in." Then one day, suddenly, 2 men were peering under his tent at him. One of them said, "My God, again!" and he wondered what he meant. But they were very nice to him and helped him put on his clothes. Later, in the cruiser, everything was hazy, and they kept asking him what he was afraid of. "What was it? What did you find?" He tried hard to think so he could explain it. It was nothing." "What were you and Horn and Silverman afraid of? What was it?" the voice demanded insistently. "I told you," he said. "Nothing." They stared at him, and the haziness cleared a little as he saw they did not understand. He wanted them to believe him, because what it told them was so very true. It wanted to kill us. Please, can't you believe me? It was waiting outside the bubble to kill us. But they kept staring, and he knew they didn't believe him. They didn't want to believe him. Everything turned hazy again, and he started to cry. He was glad when the doctor took his hand to lead him away. The bubble was carefully inspected, inside and out, and nothing was found. When it was time for Green's replacement to be transferred to it, Larkin reported to Captain McDowell. "Everything is ready, Larkin," McDowell said. "You're the next one. I wish we knew what the danger is." He scowled. "I still think one of my roustabouts from the engine room might give us a sane report 6 months from now instead of the babblings we'll get from you." He felt his face flush, and he said stiffly, "I suggest, sir, that you do not jump to conclusions until that time comes." The cruiser vanished back into hyperspace, and he was alone inside the observation bubble, 10,000 light-years beyond the galaxy's outermost sun. He looked out the windows at the gigantic sea of emptiness around him, and wondered again what the danger had been that had so terrified the men before him. Of one thing he was already certain. He would find that nothing was waiting outside the bubble to kill him.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
The Long Question by David Mason, originally published in Infinity, November 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. "We promised you folks something special this week," Larry Lonigan said, his smile glittering under the bright lights of the studio. "And Winnemint always keeps its promises, don't we? So, folks, tonight we're putting up the biggest mint offered yet on this program. $100,000! The applause was deafening. "Now then, here's the young man you all remember, the boy who hit the top money on our little group quiz last week and earned the right to win a mint. Here he is, Mr. Don Gerson. Come on out, Don!" Don Gerson was a tall, thin young man with a serious look. He did not wear glasses, but somehow he looked as if he ought to. He walked onto the stage with a kind of forced confidence and shook hands with Lonigan. "Now then, Dan, we haven't told you very much about what we're going to do for you, have we?" Lonigan asked. "No, sir." "So I think it'll be as big a surprise to you as it will to our audience." Lonigan laughed and looked archly into the cameras. "But first, we'll have to introduce you all over again, for anybody who didn't see the fine show you put up for us last week. How old are you, Don?" 28. "And you're not married, are you? Engaged? Do you trust your girlfriend not to go out with other fellows if you aren't handy?" "Well, I don't know." Gerson grinned shyly. "Did you tell her you'd be going away for a little while?" Lonigan asked, winking at the cameras. "That's what I've been told," Gerson said. "Aha, but we didn't tell you anything else, did we? Did your boss give you a leave of absence?" "Oh, yes." "Tell us, Don, what do you do for a living?" "I'm an accountant." Lonigan's grin grew wider. "Yes, folks, Don works for the great National American Insurance Company, of which you've all heard. We asked them to let us borrow Don here for 2 months, and they've been kind enough to agree. Now, working in insurance, Don, I guess you've gotten pretty good at logical predictions, eh? I mean, isn't it part of the insurance business to guess what's likely to happen?" "I'd say it was." Don Gerson was looking mildly puzzled. "Well, Don, we've set up a situation where you'll get a chance to guess what's happening next, and if you guess right, even halfway, you'll win a mint!" Lonigan boomed the last words impressively, and the orchestra blasted the theme chords into his words. "Here's what we're going to do, Don," Lonigan went on. "You're going to go down to the airport, where we've got a special helicopter waiting. Our copter will take you to the island of Santa Antonia, 200 miles off the coast. It's a lovely island, Don. You'll really like it. There's a comfortable little house there, and we've had the place all stocked up for you. There's even a nice big deep freeze from the Handy Friezo people, filled right up to the top." Lonigan paused to get the effect. "Of course," he continued, There isn't anyone else on the island. Nobody at all. And no radio, no newspapers, no way at all to hear from the outside world. Yes, sir, Don, you'll be a real Robinson Crusoe. But just think, for 2 months you'll get paid your regular salary. We're taking care of that. You can read, fish, think, maybe even write a book if you feel like it. Ever think about writing a book, Don? Gerson opened his mouth, but he was apparently too surprised to answer for a moment. Then he shook his head. No, but maybe, with all that time. Well, Don, you can certainly read if you feel like it, Lonergan went on, because we've put plenty of good, solid books on the island for you. There's fiction, of course, and textbooks on history and encyclopedias. Now, what do you think you could do with all that information in those books? Well, I'll tell you what you'd better do, Don. Lonergan's eyes flicked to the studio clock, and his voice speeded up imperceptibly. Read up, Don boy, because we're going to bring you into this studio 2 months from now, when our program resumes in the fall season, and we're going to ask you a dozen questions about things that have been happening in the meantime, people, places, and current events. If you can't answer at least 6 of those questions right, we'll be awfully sorry. The audience roared again. But if you can answer them, just 6 out of the dozen, you'll win a mint. Again, the theme music. Now, Don, how about it? Think you can do it? I'll try, sir. Gerson looked a little pale, but resolute. All right, folks, give our new Robinson Crusoe a big hand, and be sure you're watching when we bring him back to try to win a mint. And the clock blinked a red light, right on the button, Lonergan thought. The helicopter droned out over the open sea in the afternoon sun. It was much noisier than the airliner that had been Gerson's only other trip into the upper air, he thought, looking ahead. The island was not yet visible. Think you'll win the 100,000? The pilot asked, speaking loudly. It was a young man of Gerson's own age, with a cheerful round face. What? Oh, I certainly hope so. Gerson peered out over the smooth water. How long a trip is it? Oh, not so long now, the pilot assured him. Nice little island, too. I wouldn't mind this deal even if I didn't get the money. It's a first-class vacation, hey? I guess it is, Gerson said. Kinda lonesome, though. Well, if they'd sent a girl, too, you might not want to come back, the pilot grinned. Anyway, think about all that money. That'll keep you from feeling too lonesome. Gerson smiled back at him. I'm sure I could do a lot with it, he said. I remember getting stuck up at Thule 2, up in the Arctic, when I was flying commercial last year, the pilot said. Nobody there but a radio man and another pilot. Too cold to go outside even. That's what I'd call lonesome. On the horizon, a blue-green ridge began to lift above the waterline. There it is, said the pilot. Be there in another 5 minutes. The copter landed on a long, smooth beach with a picture postcard ocean lapping at the white sand. The pilot showed Don around the place with an almost proprietorial pride, pointing out the various conveniences and giving advice. The house is a real doll, he told Don. Never lived in. A rich fella owned the place and was going to use it for vacations, but he never got around to it. Incidentally, it'll be for sale when the stunt's over. Whopping price too, I'll bet. There was hot and cold running water, an electrical system powered by a gas engine, furniture, even a pair of swimming trunks hanging in a closet with other clothes. There's a laugh, the pilot observed, pointing to the trunks. You won't need them. Well, if I go swimming, Don said. The swimming's fine, but you won't have any company to worry about what you wear, the pilot said. Don had never been entirely alone in his life. It took him a moment to grasp this small detail in the picture of his immediate future. Oh, he said doubtfully. Well, you know, there's seaweed and all that. As a matter of fact, there was very little seaweed. The water was warm, and the days that followed were cloudless perfection. The nights were cool, and there was always a steady sea breeze. At first, for a few days, Don Gerson found himself moving in a pattern which resembled his normal life very closely. He awoke at 7. In fact, on the first morning, he found himself compelled to rise at once and dress. That first morning, he had an odd, lost feeling. There was no office to go to, no schedule of work to follow, no fixed orbit. He began the first day by shaving and cooking himself what, for him, was a large breakfast. He thought about going for a swim, but remembered the rule he had been given once about not swimming for 2 hours after eating. The clothes that hung in the closets were not what he would have selected himself, but they were comfortable and they fitted. He dressed in slacks and an open-necked shirt, then proceeded to investigate the library. For a few days his pattern was like that of his first day. He read the back-number piles of news magazines, the books analyzing current politics and history. He ate at regular intervals, and twice he went swimming for short periods. On both occasions he wore the trunks, and the second swim was very short. He came out of the water feeling as if, as he said to himself, there wasn't anything to it. In his life, swimming alone had never seemed to happen. Don hardly noticed the pattern beginning to fray apart. On the 5th day he overslept, and did not get up until nearly 11. That night he felt wakeful, and at midnight he ate sardines and beans. He left the cans on the kitchen table, and did not drop them into the pit behind the house as he had been doing. The next morning he did not rise till noon. In fact, he did not even wind the alarm clock. It ran down the same day, and he tried to guess at the time when he set it. There was a typewriter and a stack of paper. Don began to set down his general view of the way that events would be happening in the outside world, trying to anticipate every possible question. He assumed, to begin with, that the questions would not be too obscure, but that left a large area of possibilities, anyway. Each day he wrote for several hours, and read for several more. Sometimes he would get too interested in some line of reading that would take him into areas which, he felt, would not be likely to enter the questions. At first he pulled himself out of those lines with an abrupt snapping shut of the offending book. But for 3 days he got farther and farther afield on a line that began with a book on a recent archaeological expedition and led him through a file of National Geographics, clear back to the article on ancient Egypt in the encyclopedia. From that point he found it harder and harder to guess at the possible line that the questions might take, and he wrote on in any direction his fancy took. If the questions dealt with the elections, he wrote, the first possible ones might be on the names of the candidates. Also, the platforms and general tendencies. Now, the possible Democratic Party candidates are... And again, there might be another change in Soviet politics, but in the articles in Time and in the Reporter, the writers say that the present group is likely to continue in power for at least a while. However, if you should ask about something which sounds as if it went in that direction, I would assume that the present Premier might die. He is old and can't live much longer. Don had always been a baseball fan, and his opinions in that area were firmly rooted in both his own past and in the thick file of sports pages of newspapers. The Dodgers would probably win the pennant, and the Giants would probably sell their pitcher Joe Kenner. In boxing, he was fairly certain about the outcome of various sports events. But when it came to science, he discovered whole worlds of which they had only heard vaguely before. There were things which he understood only with difficulty, and he began to realize, with a sense of shock, how inadequate his school science classes had been. But he didn't worry. He could easily predict that this class of question would have to do either with something medical or something about atomics. He found a great deal of already predicted material in both those fields. Every magazine had a doctor writing about which disease would be conquered next, and how soon, and a number of articles gave details on how soon atomic power plants would be running, and what kinds of bombs would be tested next. Don's choice of accountancy had been motivated by a liking for logic and orderliness. he began to find a fascination in the logic and orderliness of science. His picture of a scientist had been vague at best, a picture formed from newspaper photos of Einstein, with his white hair blowing, and of movie scientists bending over strange machines and creating monsters. At one point, Don found the history and viewpoints of science drawing him into reading that could not possibly be used in the questioning. Reluctantly, and resolving to go back to that area, he moved on. "The Oil Workers' Union has a contract which runs out next month," he wrote, "and they have always had a strike at this point in their last few years. If they do strike, there will probably be a temporary shortage of fuel and gasoline. This might be the right answer if the question is, what strike is affecting the country most now?" Back into politics once more, Don began to extend his guessing as he read further. "The UN investigation of the situation in South Africa will be resumed, and the South African delegation will withdraw again. It looks as if there is a very good chance of native rebellions in French North Africa, so that a question which pointed to Africa might deal with either situation." After a while, Don had worked around to the Far East, and became more and more interested. His orderly habits led him into a pattern in which he organized the most likely events into a future history which covered, in detail, the things that would happen in the whole world to a point that went into the next few years. In fact, he noticed abruptly, the vista ahead had grown brightly clear and was still extended. He told himself that when he returned, he would continue to write his history of the future. Just for fun, though, he said to himself. Nobody would be really interested in such a thing except himself, and he was no writer. But it looked as if he might have found a real hobby, Don told himself. Why, he didn't even miss television. The thought of television reminded him of the money and the questions. The air and an occasional swim and the food had all combined to give him a feeling of health and relaxation. He felt supremely confident. He knew he could cope with the questions. And the time must be growing short. The plane should be arriving any day. Don suddenly realized that he had stopped shaving some time before, and that he had fallen into the habit of not wearing a shirt. He shaved and discovered that he had only 2 clean shirts left. He also discovered that the freezer was nearly empty, but he remembered seeing a number of plants growing near the house. If the freezer should run out before the plane arrived, he could grow something, he thought. But the freezer did not run out of supplies. Instead, the generator stopped. It was out of gas. Draining the last of the melted ice from the box, Don suddenly became aware of a simple fact. There should have been enough gas. The tank had been quite full enough to last more than the 2 months. He suddenly realized that he had completely lost count of days, and that the plane might be overdue by as much as a week or 2. Feeling a slight panic, he began to check back through his daily stacks of writing. He found that he had done an average of 8 pages every day, which gave him a means of counting back. But it was only a rough estimate, since there had been off days. Still, the count came out to at least 3 months. The plane was very definitely overdue. In the middle of the 3rd year, he completed a radio receiver, made from wire stripped from the Eustace generator and using the crystal receiver principle. It had a pinpoint balanced on an old razor blade. There had been a description of the method of making such a receiver in a mechanics magazine, and Don had done it carefully. It took him a long time, because he did not find the job very interesting, except when he was tired of reading and writing. Also, he had spent a long time extracting the blank leaves from all of the books so that he would have plenty of writing paper. The receiver seemed to be a workable design. However, all he could hear was a steady crackle and hiss, and during storms the sounds made by distant lightning. things went well otherwise. His garden grew with a minimum of attention. He had learned the easiest methods of fishing, and he could not have named a single thing that he did not have that he would want. The history grew longer. It was bound volume by volume in covers removed from books that were then piled carefully away. Don had found a way to bleach out the pages of printed matter, but there were only a few books that he could bring himself to turn into writing paper in this manner. In his notes he used the term palimpsest. He knew what it meant by now. 2234, the last Queen of England, not possessing any political power, was nevertheless regarded with great respect by the people of Britain, and her death at an advanced age was the occasion for great public mourning. However, since she had left no direct descendant, her entombment in the rebuilt Westminster Abbey marked the final end of the monarchy, even as a symbol. The year 2234 also marked the first serious attempt to cross interstellar space in a giant ship which was built to house a large colony of travellers for a long time. Among the books published in 2234 were new works by the famous historian and scholar Nosreg and his contemporary Songre. The Tragedy of Man by the playwright Gresno played at great audiences over the solar television network. Thoughtfully, Don pulled at his greying beard. He was considering the plays of Gresno, and feeling, very mildly, a longing to see them. But, he reminded himself, it would be a long time before Gresno would even be born. Meanwhile, the afternoon sun was warm against his back, here on the porch, and he still had a great deal of white paper. He took up the seagull quill and began to write once more.
The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Mid Pleasures and Palaces by James McKimmey, Jr. Originally published in If, Worlds of Science Fiction, March 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. This planet was remote and set apart, and nothing about it had made William Kirk think he might find human life. Yet just beyond, through a thorny bush shaped like an exploding rose, Kirk had seen eyes and nose and a flash of yellow hair that were definitely human. Kirk poised motionless. He was 3 miles from the rocket, and Leo, who was waiting inside of it. He thought for a moment of how Leo had told him, as they made their landing, that this is the kind of planet where you could go no further. This is the kind of planet that could be the end of 12 years, and you'd better be careful, William, old sport. Kirk noticed a faint breeze. His palms were wet, and they cooled when the breeze touched them. He placed his palms against his jacket. Damn you, Leo, he thought. Damn your rotten fortune-telling. Kirk was superstitious when he was in space, and the memory of Leo Mason's cool, quiet voice saying, "Watch it now, sport. Be careful, be careful," seemed now like some certain kiss of fate. The bush trembled, and Kirk's right hand flicked to his holster. His pistol was cold against his fingers, and he let it fit loosely in his hand, the barrel half raised. The bush shivered again, and then all at once the figure was rising from behind it, a tall, wide figure with a very tan face, lined and toughened by the sun. The shoulders, bare like the chest, were massive, yet somehow stretched-looking, as though endless exposure to wind and rain and sun had turned the skin to brown leather. Kirk had his pistol pointing at the figure's stomach now, and the figure blinked, while the breeze touched and ruffled the long bleached hair. The figure raised a large hand, palm up, and curled the fingers. "Hello," he said softly. Kirk was surprised by the word,
And the polite sound of it. Kirk remained motionless, pistol pointing. "Who are you?" he said through his teeth. "Harry," said the figure, as though Kirk surely would know who he was. "I'm Harry, of course." "Yes," said Kirk carefully. "Harry?" The figure nodded. "Harry Loren, don't you know?" "Oh, yes," Kirk said, his eyes watchful. "Harry Loren." There was something about the man's eyes, Kirk decided. They were deep-set and very bright within their sockets. They didn't match the softness of the speech. Harry Loren smiled and showed his yellow teeth. "Who are you?" he asked politely. "I'm William," Kirk said. It was as though he might be speaking to a frightened child, he thought, who held a sharp knife in his hands. "William Kirk, of course." Harry Loren nodded apologetically. "Oh, yes. I can't remember everyone. It's been so long. How are you, William?" Kirk's eyes flickered. "I'm fine." "That's nice," Harry Loren nodded. His wild hair brushed over his shoulders and reflected its yellowness against the sun. The knife, then, the one that Kirk had thought about a moment ago, appeared in the figure's hand. "Bastard!" Harry Loren hissed, and was leaping at Kirk, the knife making a sweep toward Kirk's stomach. Something kept Kirk from squeezing the trigger, and instead he swung his pistol so that it struck the brown, weathered knuckles. The knife flew into a thicket, and Loren, screaming, was upon Kirk, reaching for Kirk's neck. Kirk wrenched backward, and at the same time swung the barrel of the pistol toward the yellow flying hair. There was a cracking sound, and Harry Loren, brown and wild-looking, crumpled silently before Kirk's feet. Kirk examined the man. Then he reached down and picked up the knife from the thicket. It was crudely hammered out of some kind of alloy, but sharp nevertheless, and it could have been deadly in a hand like Harry Loren's. Kirk looked again at the yellow-haired man on the ground. He was wearing some kind of ragged cloth around his waist, and nothing else. Across his back, Kirk could see, was a curving scar, an inch wide and 10 or 12 inches long. It was white and very noticeable against the brown of the man's skin. Kirk bent down, looking at the scar carefully. It could have been made during a crash of a rocket, but there were, he noticed, fine whiter ridges running along the length of the scar, as though they had been made by fine comb-like teeth. A talon, perhaps, some kind of strange claw. Kirk straightened quickly. It went through his head that Harry Loren might not be the only animal life on this planet. He tightened his hand on his pistol, stepping backward, his eyes darting. But he could only pivot slowly, trying to see, to discover, and he was much too slow when he finally saw it. It was only a flash of yellow and brown, making a hissing kind of sound. He felt the ripping along his right arm. The pistol was going out of his hand, and a swirling blackness got in front of his eyes. When he awoke, he saw Harry Loren first, who was sitting up now, silent, motionless, with Kirk's pistol resting in his hands. To the side of Loren, and just a little behind, rested a peculiar-looking thing. It was alive, because its head, shaped like a cone that had been attached to its neck, kept swaying gently back and forth. The dark blue eyes, spaced back from the smallest end of the cone, were rather small, with no lids. The creature's neck was long and thin, a multitude of shades of yellow and brown like the head, and the rest of the body widened out like a funnel, and this area was covered with yellow feathers. It had what appeared to be arms and legs, long thin extensions of dark brown with large bony joints. At the end of each of these, Kirk could see a flat claw with rows of tiny comb-like teeth. Loren reached out and ran a hand softly along the creature's long neck. Kirk tried to think, testing his muscles without moving, and he remembered then the ripping along his right arm. He looked at the arm and at the way his jacket had been torn away along with the shirt beneath it. He could see the comb-like marking of his skin. The cut was not deep, but it bled a little and stung. He tried to move his arm and found that he could. Kirk looked back to Lauren. Lauren stroked his hand along the thin neck of the creature. Kirk decided to try. "That's a nice-looking animal, Harry." Lauren's expression did not change. Kirk paused. From the looks of the man, Lauren had been here a long time, a very long time. It had been a crash, probably, and all the years afterward of loneliness, all the time for the quiet but sure warping of the brain. He raised a hand quickly, watching Lauren's eyes. Lauren did not change expressions or move the pistol, but Kirk felt a comb-like claw touching his hand, freezing it to motionless with its razor tips. Kirk looked at the creature. The dark blue eyes were steady. Kirk lowered his hand slowly, and the claw was drawn away. The creature's head resumed its gentle swaying, and Lauren's hand resumed its stroking. Kirk licked his lips. "Where have you been?" Lauren said, his voice sudden and hoarse now. "Where have I been?" Kirk said, tight and motionless. "Why didn't you come before?" Kirk considered it. The dancing lights in the man's eyes, the high-strung sound of his voice were things to make you wary and careful. Kirk closed his fingers the slightest bit. "I didn't know you were here." Lauren's lips thinned. "Liar!" Kirk thought he might try a smile to reassure Lauren that he was telling the truth. He decided against it. "How long have you been here, Harry?" "How would I know?" Kirk thought of the endless nights and days when time ran together and there was no more separation of one time from another. Today would be tomorrow, and tomorrow would be today. No changes. Endless. "Did you crash, Harry?" "Did you crash, Harry?" Lauren mimicked, and for a moment Kirk felt a chill dancing through him as he watched the sarcastic leer of Lauren's mouth. Kirk kept his tone polite, patronizing. "Was there anyone else?" Lauren laughed, a laugh that bounced over the rocks and through the scrubs and bushes. "Was there, Harry?" "Oh, yes," Lauren said, grinning and showing his yellow teeth. 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Would you like to see their graves? I've kept the graves pretty. I know where they are, because I dug them." Lauren remained in a half-crouch, the fingers of one hand holding the pistol loosely, the other keeping up its monotonous stroking of the animal. His eyes seemed to become vacant for a moment, as though lost in the memory of the digging of 6 graves. Then they narrowed. "Where have you been?" Kirk tried to match his answer to the once of the man. "I came as soon as I could." "You did?" "Yes," Kirk said, "I did." Lauren's right hand stopped its stroking, and his fingers tightened about the thin, long neck of the animal. "Eddie," he said. Kirk saw the animal's left claw whipping out. He ducked suddenly, but the claw ripped along his left arm. He tried to roll sideways, and then he lay, half-sprawled, looking at the blood welling up from his new set of ripped ridges in his arm. He shifted his eyes to look at the animal, and he was quite certain that he could detect a small mouth fitting around the underside of the funnel-shaped head. It was only a line, but Kirk thought that there was a grinning look to it. "You didn't come as soon as you could," Lauren said, his voice an angry, trembling sound. "I did, Harry," Kirk said, still remaining in his half-sprawl. "I really did." Lauren replaced his hand on the neck of the animal, squeezing. "No, no," Kirk said, and he tried to keep the panic out of his voice. "Harry, I'm telling you the truth." Lauren's mouth showed a faint surface of his yellow teeth. He shook his head, slowly, back and forth, his fingers tightening around the animal's neck. "Harry, listen," Kirk said, watching Lauren's squeezing fingers. "It's over now. You don't have to wait any longer.
I'll take you back now. I'll take you home. Lauren froze, staring. Home? He said. That's right, Kirk said. That's right, Harry. Home, Lauren breathed, and his eyes were suddenly like a child's, wide and unbelieving. The waiting's all over, Kirk said. You don't have to wait any longer. I don't have to wait any longer, Lauren repeated softly, and his hand dropped from the neck of the animal. Kirk watched Lauren and the swaying animal. The rocket's ready, he said. Lauren's eyes were lost in some distant memory. Gradually, Kirk could see the eyes turn shiny with tears. Is Annette waiting? He asked. Kirk thought quickly. He knew that what he was going to say shouldn't be said, because he had no right. But he was thinking of his own skin. Why, yes, Harry, he said slowly. I imagine Annette is waiting. Lauren let a quick breath come out through his teeth. Annette, he whispered. And Dickie? Dickie? Kirk said. Little Dickie, Lauren said, and he held his breath. Oh, yes, Kirk lied. Of course. I can't ask about Eddie, because we never had the chance, Lauren said, his eyes still lost. I always told Annette that no kid should ever grow up without a brother. Oh no, we never had the chance for Eddie. Lauren reached out absently and touched the brown and yellow neck of the creature. I called this fellow Eddie, though. Do you suppose that was all right? He's not very pretty. Kirk nodded, looking at the waving, funnel-shaped head of the animal. That was all right, Harry. Does she still braid her hair? Lauren asked, his eyes shiny. What? Kirk said. Annette. Does she still braid her hair? Why? Kirk said slowly, feeling his palms going moist. Why wouldn't she, Harry? A faint smile flickered across Lauren's lips as he remembered. Kirk watched one of the creature's claws out of the corners of his eyes. He opened and closed the fingers of one hand, testing. The claw jerked slightly. The blood of Kirk's new wound was drying, he knew, because it had only been a surface cut. He wondered how it would be if the thing used its claws with serious intent, like it must have to make the cut that had been raked into Lauren's back. Lauren was bending forward now, and Kirk could see the tip end of that scar. Somehow Lauren had managed to stay alive and befriend the creature. Eddie. The lidless eyes stared. Kirk knew that he had to make use of the moment. It could break apart any time. The wildness could return, the unreasoning. Listen, Harry, he said. We ought to get started, you know. There's no use waiting longer. Started? Lauren said. Of course, Kirk said, trying to keep his voice matter-of-fact. You're going home. Lauren looked at Kirk, and his eyes turned suddenly hard, and his mouth lost the faint smile. I am, he stated flatly. Yes, Kirk said. Of course. You're a liar. Now, Harry, Kirk said, his eyes flickering to the waiting animal, I surely wouldn't lie to you. You haven't come for me until after all this time, and now you say you surely wouldn't lie to me. It was like standing in a gully, Kirk thought, watching a boulder teetering above you. It tipped this way and that, and you didn't know when or if it was going to come hurtling down. You waited. But Kirk couldn't wait, he knew. He had to do something. Harry, listen, it wasn't easy to find you, don't you see? He hoped he was making it sound as though all he had done for the last dozen years of exploring was look for Harry Lauren. He wished that the damn thing would stop swaying its ugly head back and forth. Lauren's hand was inching out toward the yellow and brown neck. Look, Harry, these things aren't done in a day. A day, Lauren hissed. A day? All this time and you say a day. No, I'm sorry, Kirk said quickly.
He wished he could shift out of the cramped, half-lying position he was in. "I didn't mean a day, Harry. I meant it wasn't easy. We didn't know where you were." He was talking quickly, whining almost, and he'd never whined before. Lauren's fingers were touching the waving neck. "We'd better hurry," Kirk said desperately. "Annette's waiting. And Dickie, of course." Lauren blinked. "You wouldn't want to keep them waiting any longer, not after all this time, Harry." Lauren stroked his fingers slowly down the long neck of the animal. "I think," Kirk said, almost hoarsely, "now that I really remember it, Annette was still wearing her hair braided. I remember that now, Harry, positively." Lauren froze the motion of his hand and stared at Kirk. His lips trembled, and then suddenly he put his hands in front of his face. He bent forward, and Kirk felt his nerves jumping, watching the man start to cry. The animal turned its stare away from Kirk for the first time. It looked at Lauren, and then slowly raised a claw, touching Lauren's shoulder carefully. It made a sound then, a peculiar hissing sound, soft, barely audible. There was no danger in it, or menace, only a pitiful sound. Lauren raised his head a little and brought his hands away from this face. Tears had cut through dust and grime, and his face was streaked. "Shall we go, Harry?" Kirk said. Lauren wiped at his eyes, stupidly, without knowing what he was doing. Then he brought his hands down and wiped them across his chest. "All right," he said, "let's go." He picked up Kirk's pistol from where he had dropped it on the ground and held it out. Kirk looked at the gun and at the animal. The claw had been drawn away from Lauren's shoulder, and again it was poised, ready. "You keep it, Harry," he said. "Oh, yes, of course," Lauren said. There was a moment of silence as Lauren stuck the pistol absently into the waist of his ragged cloth covering beside the knife. The three of them waited then, Kirk, Lauren, and the animal. "Eddie," Lauren said finally, "are you ready?" Kirk felt himself smiling in the direction of the animal. He remembered when he was a small boy going by a house where there had been a mongrel with a flat head and large teeth. He had smiled at that animal as he was doing now. The dog had sensed his fear in spite of the smile. Lauren was standing up slowly, and the animal's head swayed in slow circling motions. "All right," Lauren said. Kirk glanced at the man, saw the wild, nearly vacant look of the face, the polite tilt of the head. Kirk's palms were wet. "God damn it," he thought, and he stood up suddenly. The animal extended a claw, slowly, turning it so that it seemed to wind and circle as it came toward Kirk. "Eddie," Lauren said. The claw came away. Kirk caught his breath. "Shall we go?" Lauren said, his eyes shining. "Yes," Kirk said. "We'll go, Harry." He turned slowly so that his back was to Lauren and the animal. He thought about the comb-like claws and the scar on Lauren's back. He thought about Lauren's knife and about the pistol. He wanted to look back as he walked. He wanted to talk, to hear Lauren's answer and so know just where he was. More than anything, he wanted to break into a run and get into that rocket and get out of here. He could see the gleam of the rocket finally, but he didn't look back yet. He kept moving. As he got closer, he could see Leo standing near the base of the ship, tall, leaning carelessly against the silver surface, smoking. He wanted to shout to Leo, to tell him for God's sake to wake up and protect him. They reached the edge of the clearing, and Leo, whose careless body had stiffened, waited motionless, one hand on his pistol. Kirk stopped. "There it is, Harry," he said, not turning around. "There's the ship." He waited, half closing his eyes, breathing slowly. There was no sound. "That's Leo, my friend, Harry," Kirk said, putting his palms flat against his thighs. "Your friend, Harry." Leo, Kirk could see, was still frozen, his eyes slitted to narrow brightness. Kirk began to step into the clearing. "Hello there, Leo," he said, his voice a tense, grating sound. "I've brought some friends." Leo was lifting his pistol out of its holster, inchingly. "Friends!" Kirk rasped. Leo's thin eyes flickered, and the pistol slid back into the holster. Kirk turned around slowly, and he saw that Lauren had stopped just inside the clearing. The animal remained beside him, its head making its slow circles. Lauren was staring up at the rocket, and the sun reflecting from the bright surface came down and shone on Lauren's face, deepening the lines there. "Leo," Kirk said slowly, "this is Harry Lauren and his friend, Eddie. Harry's been here quite a while, waiting for us." "Oh, yes," said Leo, still not moving. "That's right, Leo," Kirk said. "Quite a while. What year was it, Harry?" he said across the clearing. "What year did you crash?" Lauren blinked, and there were tears again in his eyes. He reached out slowly, and the animal shifted so that its head touched Lauren's hand. 2419. Kirk put his teeth together. 2419, he said. Lauren nodded slowly, his eyes still upon the rocket. 18 years, Leo said softly. A long time, Leo, Kirk said. He thought of a girl with her hair braided about her head, looking up, while Lauren had shot into the depths of sky and space. He thought of a little boy called Dickie, standing there, too, watching a fast disappearing blackness in the sky. He thought about 18 years and the fading of youth. A boy becoming a man, braided hair becoming grey, memories fading and minds adjusting. New love, new dedication. A world shifting. A universe shifting. Kirk looked at Eddie, the animal, real and alive, waiting patiently at the tips of Lawrence's fingers. Eddie's been with Harry for a long time, he said. Oh, said Leo quietly. Lauren's hand stroked the brown and yellow head. Harry, Kirk said, we're going to leave now. Are you ready? Lauren was silent. You go up first, will you, Leo? Kirk said. Leo looked at him, a faint frown touching his brow. Then he began moving up the ladder to the airlock. Kirk waited until Leo had disappeared into the rocket. Then he repeated, We're going to leave now, Harry. Are you ready? Lauren remained motionless, his hand touching the animal's head. Suddenly he turned then and began moving slowly away through the brush, the brown and yellow creature bobbing beside him with queer rocker-like jumps. Goodbye, Harry, Kirk said. Finally he turned and climbed up the ladder. When he had gotten into his seat, he said, Let's go, Leo, and he moved his hands to the controls. The rocket settled into the quiet motion of its course through space. But I don't get it, Leo said. I really don't. All that time, and then all he has to do is walk a dozen yards and get into the rocket, and he's going home. That's all he would have to do. Why? Kirk said. Why? Said Leo, frowning. Kirk nodded, looking at the man. Why? The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And don't forget to check out the channel. There's hundreds of stories. Hundreds of stories.